in the letter, you also wrote that you stood right around Nobel, or perhaps slightly biased toward defense. Where do you stand right now? If you have already changed your position, could you also explain the reasons of that change?
Yes, well, I really haven't changed. I still think that I'm at my normal balance of aggressiveness or defensiveness, or perhaps, as you say, a little bit defensive. The reasons being the expectation that interest rates will rise in order to combat inflation, the possibility that this will cause a recession. Tighter money often causes a recession, and also the geopolitical uncertainty in the world with Ukraine and so forth. So those are the reasons to be slightly defensive, if you want to try that, but not too much, because I think that the economic outlook is generally pretty good in the United States. That's mostly what I'm talking about.
In your latest memo, you observed that the pendulum is swinging away from globalization and offshoring to onshoring.
Yes.
Why and how did you get that observation?
I think that there has been a very long swing of the pendulum over the last 30 or 40, maybe 50 years in the direction of globalization, increased international trade, increased ease of transportation, lowering of trade barriers, and especially the great development of manufacturing capability in Asia, taking advantage of low labor costs. Now, I think the pendulum is swinging away because the pandemic and, of course, the war in Ukraine with regard to energy have disclosed the downside of offshoring and globalization, which is the reliance on distant sources. So I think, as I said in the memo, I think to some degree, you're going to see a swing from people pursuing the cheapest goods to people pursuing the safest or the surest sources of goods. And those are more likely to be onshore in the United States. The cost will go up, but some people will judge that to be worth it in order to have more confidence in the supply chain. And of course, supply chain, if you Googled supply chain this year, you would find thousands of citations. If you did it 5 years ago, you probably wouldn't find any, because 5 years ago we were obtaining our supplies largely in Asia, but for the often offshore. But nobody was concerned about it. Nobody was worried about supply chain difficulties. So I do think that there's a swing back, and I think I use the example of semiconductors. And I think that you'll see a lot of semiconductor manufacturers building plants in the U.S. with, I should add, with government encouragement.
So what kinds of investment opportunities will that transition create? Definitely, there is a strong possibility that semiconductors in the United States, the prices of those companies, stocks, will go up. So that is a good opportunity for investors to invest in semiconductors in the United States and in other countries other than Taiwan and so on, China.
Well, maybe so. But I mean, Nakanome-san, this is a good example of why investing is not easy, because it's not always easy to see the process through which value is created. Yes, U.S. manufacturers will source more semiconductors in the U.S. Does that mean that their stocks will go up? Well, maybe so, but there'll be a challenge because their costs will go up. The semiconductors they source in the US will not be as inexpensive as the ones that they've been sourcing in South Korea or Taiwan. And if their costs go up, maybe the profits go down for a while. Maybe the stocks are soft. So I think it's hard to foresee with confidence what the implications are and which stocks will do well. Now, some of these onshoring efforts will require land, construction of factories, building of infrastructure. I mentioned this in the memo. Power and construction of development of houses and shops around the factories. You know, the factories are likely to be very large, require a lot of land, maybe be built in areas that are not developed at the present time. So I think there will be opportunities in developing some of the surrounding land. But, you know, it's not going to be easy to figure out which companies will be the beneficiaries, which companies will build the plants for the manufacturers or build the small cities that will grow up around them. But we can all try.
How do you think about the impact of interest rate hikes and QT by FRB to stocks and other financial assets?
The easy money policies of the central banks over the last 13 years, since the global financial crisis, have created strong economic growth in many parts of the world and rising asset prices. But the very strong stimulus engaged in the pandemic has introduced inflation. And the world wants to combat that inflation now with tighter money, quantitative tightening, interest rate increases, shrinking of the Fed balance sheet. All of these things imply slower business. And most programs of tightening have produced recessions historically. Now there are some conditions, the consumer in the US is in very good shape, and thus there may not be a recession. But I think that you know, you have to worry about it if you are given to these things. And so, you know, the most likely result will be a recession, and higher interest rates and recession generally should result in lower asset prices. And this is the reason for my defensiveness. But I'm not highly confident that that's going to be the case.